Hey kids, it's Tama. And since some of you are new to the Annex, I'm going to take the time in today's episode of introducing you to each of 7 parts that make up our weekly gathering. The first part is called the welcome. And the way we do our welcome is with a song. And the song says very simply, "The Spirit in me greets the Spirit in you." And that's a really important way for us to start because it recognizes that the Spirit of God is in each one of us. And when we come together, we begin by acknowledging that. Thanks to Abigail and Oliver for leading that for us, and for all of you who either grabbed an instrument or who sang along. It's amazing to think that it doesn't matter how we're feeling. It doesn't matter what we've been up to the past week. It doesn't matter where we're coming from. That all of us are in God and God is in us. Now, part 2 of our time together at the Annex is when we do what's called the practices. So it could be prayer practices or life practices. And these are kind of like heart exercises. They exercise the muscles of our heart or our spirit, what's inside of us. Somewhat similar to the way we do exercises to make our bodies stronger, running or jumping or biking or dancing. We also have exercises that we can do to strengthen the muscles of our heart. So that's part 2 at the Annex. And this is the way we do that. We draw a number from a pail. Now it's number 4. And number 4 corresponds with a practice. And the practice that 4 matches up with is the practice of generosity. And we also have something that goes along in each of these baskets that reminds us, gives us a clue about what exactly that practice is all about. So the practice for generosity has with it a drawstring bag. Which means if we open it like that and look inside, and aha, you guys remember that? That roll of money, a wad of money, and those coins. And that might remind you of the way we're saving money towards a project which involves helping to build a playground or part of a playground, maybe a swing for the shelter for homeless families that's not very far from our church. And I think the last time we counted our money, we had about almost $80, I think, from you kids sharing from your allowance, or Stephen, who had a fun little fundraiser for us. And this will go towards helping to pay for the playground. But since we're in this lockdown, we haven't been able to move forward on that project. So I was thinking about generosity, and I have another idea. I'm going to go and find Oliver, and you'll understand why. So hold tight. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I found him. He was in the kitchen making himself some lunch. So Oliver, welcome to the Annex.
Thank you. I'm honored.
And He didn't know I was going to do this. And I will say that what I'm about to ask him, he did unbeknownst to me and without any prompting from his parents at all. And what I want to ask you, Oliver, is about the online donation you made last week.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit about what that was and what prompted you to do it?
Well, I was on my computer and I was reading my emails, and I had an email from the Vancouver Aquarium, and it was saying basically since the coronavirus, they haven't had any visitors, so they're not getting enough money to, keep the aquarium going. So they need people to donate money, and I didn't really even think about it, but I just clicked the donate button and I donated $100. And the cool thing about it is that the money you donate gets doubled by another organization. So basically they got $200. And for me, it's not even it's not a question about whether or not it's worth the money. It's just something that I feel like I have to do because the aquarium is a big part of my life.
Yeah, you went to the aquarium as a kid. Hi, Abigail. I'm just interviewing Oliver here. You went to the aquarium, some of the camps as a kid.
Yeah. I for 2 summers I went. I did the aquarium camps in the summer. Yeah.
And we would visit there as a family. And I know the aquarium's losing. I think it costs them millions a day to care for the residents there. So that's a huge gesture of support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So thanks, Oliver. Thanks for sharing.
No problem, guys. Always a pleasure.
So Oliver decided to use some of his own savings to help the aquarium in their time of need. And there's so many different ways we can be generous. It's not just about money. Some of us don't have money even to share around. So there are other ways that we can share. We can share our time. We can share, of course, our toys. We can share in the housework. There's so many great ways that we can practice the exercise of generosity. Part 3 of our time together in the Annex takes us into the stories of the Bible. The stories we've been following since Easter Sunday are, of course, the stories of the resurrected Christ. And there really aren't that many of them. Jesus only appeared to his disciples and his followers about 4 or 5 times, and even then very briefly. And he appeared behind closed doors and in unexpected places, and then he was gone again. So it's a very interesting period of Jesus' life to be looking at together. And today's story comes once again from the last of the 4 Gospels. You remember the Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the last of those Gospels is John. And we are going to be looking at the story which is found on page 410 and 411 in your children's Bibles, for those of you who have this version, or you could look it up again in a regular Bible. Remember how you look for the book and then the chapter and then the verse. And I've got our scroll set up here. All ready to go. Those are the same pictures that are in the children's Bible. So let's listen to this. One of the last stories, and I have to say, one of my absolute favorite stories in all of the Gospels. Peter, who was one of Jesus' disciples and closest friends, wasn't really sure what to do with himself anymore. He'd spent the last 3 years on the road with Jesus, but now everything had changed. Since the resurrection, Jesus really wasn't around very much, and Peter wasn't exactly sure what he was supposed to be doing. So he thought, well, I'll do what I've always done, what I know how to do, and that's fish. So he asked some of the other disciples if they wanted to go out in the boat and fish. And the way they practiced fishing, it was something they did at night. And they fished through the night and they caught nothing. So they were already feeling quite discouraged when they saw a figure standing on the far shore. And the figure called out to them and said, "Why don't you try the other side? Cast your nets on the other side of the ship." Which, to their credit, I'm sure they had tried all the options. But nevertheless, they did as this figure standing on the shore had instructed. And their nets filled up with so many fish that they could hardly drag the nets back into the boat. And as they got closer to the shore, they saw that the person standing on the shore was Jesus. And Peter was excited beyond words, and he couldn't wait even to get to the shore to be with Jesus. He literally dove into the water with his clothes on, and he swam until he got to where he could stand, and then he stumbled his way up to the shore to be with Jesus again. And Jesus had made them breakfast, had lit up a fire and fried up some fish and had breakfast waiting for them. And they all gathered around together and spent that time with Jesus. And Jesus took Peter aside when they'd finished eating and said, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Master and friend, you know how much I love you." And Jesus said, "Do you really love me? Deep down, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Jesus, I can't say how much I love you." And Jesus asked a third time, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "I love you, Jesus." And then Jesus turned it back on him and said, "Then take that love and share it with others." It's kind of like take that love and, in the words of Jesus, feed my sheep. Care for those around you. Love the world around you. And now Peter, who before didn't know what his work was or what to do with his life now he knew. Now he understood. And he had this great calling to share the love of Jesus and to care for others the way Jesus had loved and cared for him. So the kids of the Annex have a number of ways to respond to the stories after we've heard them. Part 4 are the feelings. And what we do is we think back over the story and we pick out one character, maybe one who we identify with more than the others on that particular morning or that day of hearing the story. So in this story, it could be Peter, or it could be one of the other disciples in the boat. Could maybe even be one of the fish, if you wanted. Or it could be Jesus himself. And we simply ask, what was that character feeling? What, at different points in the story, might have they been feeling or experiencing? And of course, I love to hear your insights and perspective on that. But since I can't hear you in person, I have had to go ahead and pick out a few feeling words myself on behalf of all of us. So this morning, the 3 words I've picked out and I think these pertain mostly to the character of Peter. I think at first he was feeling worried, and I'm pointing up to our feelings chart there that has about 40 different feelings options. And even though it has so many to choose from, they're not always all there for us, and we have to add our own. But worried is up there. I think Peter was maybe worried about what to do now, or things had changed so much. Jesus was coming, but then also going, and Peter maybe wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with his own life now. Go back to fishing, or somehow carry on with the work he'd been doing with Jesus beforehand. I don't know. But it seemed like his life was in a little bit of upheaval, and he was worried. Maybe like a lot of our families and parents in these days of lockdown. The second word I chose was ecstatic. I actually chose excited, but ecstatic maybe captures it even better. I think when Peter saw Jesus, we know from the way he just jumped out of the boat and started swimming and running and stumbling towards Jesus, that he couldn't wait to reconnect to probably the person that he considered his very closest friend. And the last word I looked for on the feelings poster here wasn't there, and so I thought, well, I'm going to have to write that one up myself. So the word I chose, the last of the words, is safe. And that comes from that gathering around the fire, cooking that fish and eating together, being with Jesus again, being with your other friends. And somehow I think Peter felt safe again, like that was a good place for him to be. So those were my 3 feeling words, and you might have some very different ones. Part 5, and it's our second way of responding to the stories, is what we call the creative response. This is actually the hardest one to capture on video, especially when I'm here by myself, because really it's about the creative responses, the artistic responses that you guys come up with, mostly out of these feeling words, taking these feeling words and then putting them into a creative or artistic response. And since we can't all be here together and I can't kind of demonstrate how we do that, I'm going to use pictures and a little bit of a video segment from a few months back to give you the idea of how this has worked in our class, where the story we had just listened to was of Mary learning that she was going to be the mother of Jesus. She had been chosen by God to be the mother of Jesus. So let's see, there's 3 options we have in the annex for responding. There's the artistic, or it's usually painting, visual arts type response. There's a station for that, and here 2 girls are working on a painting, and I see the word happy there. Must have been one of their feeling words. And then we have a choreo corner for choreography, putting into our bodies, as it were, acting out our feeling words. And sometimes the kids act out the whole scene, and sometimes they just act out single postures. And here's one of our kids holding a posture that she felt Mary might have held when she learned that she was going to be the mother of Jesus. And then our last little clip here, I'm going to play it for you, is our music station. And we have a bunch of instruments there and no written music. The kids go over, and in the 10 or 15 minutes they have, They come up in that short period of time, working together as a group amazingly with little chunks of music that somehow capture the feelings that they decide to explore together. So let's listen to this group of boys playing a song in response to the news of the birth of Jesus. Part 6 of our time together in the Annex is called the Benediction. And it's when we all gather together in a big circle and we sort of hold arm to arm, well, when we're not in a time of pandemic, and we bless each other. That's what benediction means. It's one of the words from the tradition, kind of an old-fashioned sounding word, but it simply means giving a blessing. And you might say, well, who's blessing who? And the answer is yes. God is blessing you. You are blessing God. I am blessing you, and you are blessing me. And we're all blessing each other in this closing song that we sing together.
Be not afraid, sing out for joy, Christ is risen, hallelujah. Be not afraid, sing out for joy, Christ is risen, hallelujah.
So that brings us to part 7, which is simply called The Stones. And it's how we close our time together at the Annex. And I'm going to get our stones off the shelf and explain how this part works. We have 2 jars, one of them with an arrow going up, one with an arrow going down. And each week that we're together, we take at least 1 stone if it's been an especially meaningful and productive time together. Sometimes we take up to 3 stones. We feel so good about our time together. But in these video produced classes, I've just been taking 1. We take the stone from the arrow going down and we put it over into the arrow going up. And that helps us count down to the point now where we just have 5 stones left. And when we get to the bottom, we have a little party to celebrate having been together all these weeks. This jar, the full one, becomes a testament, kind of. It bears witness to all the times we've spent together and the relational connection between all of us. So until next time, have a good week.